You may have heard of racial segregation, which was prevalent in the United States until recently. Back then, segregated neighborhoods and ghettos were the only places for black people to dwell. What if we told you that some nations, typically referred to as the most developed, still practice racism and segregation today? Folks will ask questions if there are black and white folks walking together. That's because Afrophobia has trained them to avoid black people. In addition to being racist, the authorities and police only stop and search black individuals while letting white people continue. The locals still refuse to serve black customers in restaurants and despise having black people around. Yes, the color of the people there affects how people interact with one another. What are those countries like, and what else happens there covertly that makes them racist? We assure you that the list includes nations from every continent. Perhaps your intention is to relocate there. Watch this video first, since it will give you a more in-depth perspective on these nations, setting their enviable reputations and historical sites aside. Let's get going. 10. Even after so many years, racism is still present in Brazil. Slavery on plantations and breeding farms were common in Brazil in the past. Then, following the abolition of slavery and the slave trade, Brazil underwent transition, but racism persisted in the social fabric. A bleak truth lies beyond the beaches and vivacious samba tunes. One of the top 10 nations dealing with a significant racism issue that can make traveling there quite uneasy is Brazil. Given Brazil's image as a melting pot of diverse races, this could come as a surprise. However, a pervasive racial division still exists beneath the surface. This division has deep historical origins that date back to the abolition of slavery in 1888. Brazilian officials carefully developed a story of racial harmony, rather than actually attempting to incorporate black people into society. They wanted to present Brazil as a special place where all races live in harmony. This story obscures a terrible reality that many Brazilians, especially those of color and people of mixed race, still have to deal with today. The statistics on racial disparity in Brazil show a sobering reality. Brazilians who are black and brown suffer the most from police brutality and limited access to education. They are underrepresented in circles of decision-making. Surprisingly, they account for a whopping 64% of the unemployed population and have an almost thrice higher risk of becoming a victim of homicide. Their income also reflects this shocking gap, as they often make half as much as their white peers. Surprisingly, despite the high percentage of Brazilians who identify as black, there are disproportionately few black people in positions of power. Only 18% of members of Congress and 4.7% of executives of significant corporations are black. Number 9. People prefer to visit Europe to explore historical landmarks and the remnants of the Roman and Greek civilizations. Italy seems like a nice destination in this case. It provides its fascinating streets, delectable cuisine, and historical attractions. However, racism is another aspect of Italy that must be acknowledged. Racism is an issue that has come to light frequently, raising worries among both residents and visitors. Recent years have seen an increase in the visibility of racist incidents, which has sparked considerable public outrage. Racism has been a problem in Italy, but some, like volleyball star Paula Igonu, who is of Nigerian heritage, think that things are steadily improving. Those who hold a more negative perspective include Lillian Thuram, a former French professional footballer, implying that racism has gotten worse, especially with the current right-wing coalition government's influence. Racism has been in Italy for a long time and is still present, lying dormant until the appropriate time to erupt. Romelu Lukaku, a football player, was the target of racist chanting from Juventus supporters, which led the city of Turin to issue 171 restraining orders. Italy has committed itself to eradicating racism by making statistics on race unavailable. It is challenging to determine the scope of the problem, because the government does not actively collect statistics on racial and cultural diversity. Italy differs from other European nations, where such information is easily accessible due to the lack of data. In 2021, a UNICEF survey produced depressing results, In Italy, around 60% of young individuals admitted to harboring unintentional racism. This implies that biases still influence people's behavior even when they may not be aware of having them. Spain comes in at number 8. One of the most well-known nations in Europe, Spain looks to have a contemporary form of government today. Spain's vibrant cities, breathtaking beaches, and rich culture may entice you to travel there. There is a secret, though, hidden behind this alluring front. A sobering truth that can cause you to second-guess your travel plans. Spain, a country that has long been home to a variety of cultures, including Black Spaniards and people of color, is battling a pervasive problem: racism. This issue is not unique. Because of how deeply it permeates society, many people now list Spain among the top 10 racist nations to avoid traveling to. People of color living in Spain and those of African heritage who hold Spanish citizenship have long discussed their harrowing encounters with racism. Cuban author Abraham Jimenez Inoa, who moved to Spain in 2021, has been recording their own brushes with bigotry. Surprisingly, he has so far documented a mind-boggling 182 incidents. These occurrences vary from unfair ID checks on public transportation to unfair surveillance in retailers. The testimonies of Noah present a troubling image of a society that seems to be ignoring its own prejudices. Even the sports industry, which is frequently regarded as a unifying force, has not been immune to this unpleasant truth. Talented teenage star Vinicius Jr. endured horrible racial taunts from opposing fans during a match between Real Madrid and Valencia in May 2023. The stadium resounded with monkey cries, a crude taunt that highlights the widespread racism in Spanish culture. For Vinicius, this episode is not unique. He has spoken out about the several incidents of racist abuse he experienced while living in Spain. Spain might not appear to be the ideal vacation spot from the perspective of a traveler. Racism in America is so pervasive that it serves as a sobering reminder that it can hide behind the most endearing facades. Please remember to thumbs up, share, and subscribe to our channel if you want to see more content about Black identity, culture, history, and civilization. Let's move on now. 7. In order to sell African slaves to the Americas and Europe, Morocco served as the transatlantic slave trade's main point of entry. Sadly, anti-Black racism still persists today, despite the fact that non-Black Moroccans frequently deny or disregard it. Black Moroccans regularly suffer from the use of racial slurs and dehumanizing labels, which devalue their value and humanity. This language displays a lack of comprehension and empathy because it is based on historical prejudices. In Morocco, Black people frequently experience dehumanization. Black people are occasionally reduced to demeaning stereotypes by comparisons to animals like pigs and monkeys. Sub-Saharan African migrants are particularly the target of this behavior, making them feel marginalized. They may go by the names Kurd, monkey, Khanzir, pig, cannibal, or beast, according to Haiwan. The history of slavery, demographic diversity, and prejudice are surprisingly not taught in schools or freely discussed. This silence supports ignorance and obstructs the advancement of the fight against discrimination. The 6th, Cuba. Cuba provides you Cuban cigars, the emotions of its leaders like Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, and the most exquisite Caribbean beaches with clean waters and excellent sand. Its enticing cuisine, varied cultures, and top-notch entertainment have made it a popular destination for tourists. Racism, however, is a complicated and troubling problem that hides beneath this endearing exterior. Cuba's reputation as a country with strict law enforcement has attracted attention, but not for the right reasons. Random detentions of people on the streets are a possibility for all citizens, regardless of their nationality. Black Cubans are particularly affected by this disturbing habit, especially if they are seen with white tourists. A Black man will be stopped, searched, and questioned if he is seen walking with a white woman. The white woman would be questioned about whether or not she was being compelled to accompany the Black man. White visitors' safety seems to be the government's first priority in Cuba, which can make for unpleasant and demoralizing interactions for those who are affected. It is possible for the authorities to incorrectly target Black Americans who may have believed they shared an identity with one another in Cuba. The late Mark Sawyer, an African-American specialist on Cuba, described how the police would frequently stop him and assume something bad was going on because he had a passport. Such encounters highlighted how widespread this problem is. The fifth, Switzerland. Switzerland doesn't need an introduction because it's on everyone's travel wish list. It's because of the abundance of wildlife, excellent weather, breathtaking mountain views, and mouth-watering cuisine. It's a popular destination for vacationers, and when there aren't any Black people, everything seems ideal. But if you're Black, there's an issue. A current report delivered to the UN. The Human Rights Council has demonstrated that racism against Black people is a problem in Switzerland. This report clarifies discrimination, which includes measures taken by the police against Black individuals, such as routine checks and searches and brief detentions. One major issue is when police target someone based on their skin tone. Police frequently check Black residents more frequently, search them more thoroughly, and request their IDs. Tragedies occasionally result from this. Resistance is sparked when Black individuals are detained without being provided with any supporting documentation, resulting in murders. Racism affects housing and employment in addition to the police. Finding an apartment might be challenging for those whose names sound foreign, such as Wanis, that are not generally Swiss. Additionally, it is more difficult to find work if your name has an African or Balkan tone. This is a serious issue that occurs frequently. The fourth, Mexico. Beautiful beaches, islands, historic temples and ruins, as well as tacos and chilaquiles, are just a few of Mexico's many attractions. Racism, however, goes hand in hand with all of this. The country's gorgeous landscapes and diverse cultures frequently conceal this brutal truth, yet it cannot be disregarded. Mexico, a country of sharp contrasts, harbors a murky racism that hangs over its crowded streets and joyous occasions for a very long time. Racism appears in an unsettling pattern that permeates all facets of society, but is most prevalent in the media and advertising. Billboards display imagery that subtly or overtly incorporate racism and classism into society as a whole. The overwhelming presence of white faces in these advertisements, whether they are for supermarkets, department stores, or beer and vehicle commercials, casts a somber tone. It pushes Mexicans to view becoming white as their ultimate objective in life. This continuous barrage of advertising is a regular occurrence. It serves as a stark reminder of the country's pervasive divisions. However, the issue goes beyond marketing. A few months ago, employees at an elite steakhouse in Mexico City made an unpleasant policy public. Customers with lighter skin tone had priority seating at the better tables. In a nation where traditionally darker complexions linked with lower earnings, restricted access to education, and limited media presence, the idea that fair-skinned consumers were receiving preferential treatment wasn't altogether shocking. In Mexico, a Black family will receive degrading labels like negrito or little black one if they reside near a town where fair-skinned people reside. A third, Colombia has a unique character thanks to its coffee, emeralds, unusual fruits, stunning beaches, festivals, architecture, and wildlife. The ugly truth of racism, however, lies beneath this lovely exterior, rendering all of these appealing qualities useless. Afro-Colombian and indigenous populations of Colombia, which is one of the top 10 nations battling systemic racism, face the brunt of this problem. Colombia's racial past is immediately obvious as you stroll through the bustling streets of Bogotá or take in the breathtaking scenery of Chaco's Pacific Department. The numbers provide a compelling narrative. Although Colombia has the second largest population of people of African descent in Latin America, up until the 1990s, little was known about them. The road to establishing social equality has been a steep one, even with the implementation of multiculturalism laws in the 1990s. Afro-Colombians frequently felt an unsettling invisibility prior to these legislative reforms, being disregarded by both the government and academic institutions. A fundamental right, education, brings attention to Colombia's racial disparity. Schools suffered tremendously when mining-related river shallowness and torrential storms devastated Chaco's rural villages. Children of color and indigenous peoples in Colombia lost months of education as a result of the state's apathy. While this was going on, wealthy white students in Bogotá resumed their schooling as usual. This extreme inequality exposes the depressing truth of a racist system. Racial inequities in Colombia permeate the political arena, healthcare systems, agricultural industries, and trade institutions, in addition to the educational system. Indigenous and Afro-Colombian communities are underrepresented and are given symbolic rather than substantive representation. Despite the impact of the worldwide Black Lives Matter movement, Colombia is still reticent to address its long history of prejudice and structural racism. Indicator 2, France. With approximately 90 million tourists arriving there year, France proudly declares itself the world's most populous nation. Popular vacation spot. It's because you can wander through Paris's picturesque neighborhoods or visit historic landmarks like the Eiffel Tower and the Louvre Museum. Many people's dreams include simply visiting France and Paris. Racism, however, casts a dark shadow beneath France's great history and culture, a reality that should not be ignored. A worrisome undertone marries many people's experiences, even though it's not often immediately obvious to outsiders. Recent findings show that racism is still a problem, despite efforts to eradicate it and commemorate victories, unintentionally creating a favorable environment for destructive anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, the COVID-19 epidemic. Political campaigns have also rekindled the conversation over security and immigration. In French society, racism and xenophobia are commonplace. Notably, racism frequently exists below the surface, hidden from view behind polite masks. Black people frequently receive jobs like those in the back office or as cleaners, which is an example of subtle racism in action. When one sees the stark differences in possibilities in jobs, it is difficult to deny this reality. The law of July 1, 1972, which outlaws racist comments, defamation, and encouragement to discrimination, hatred, or racial violence, will be 50 years old in 2022 when France will mark the occasion. It also commemorated the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination's 51st anniversary of ratification. Nevertheless, in spite of everything, racism persists in France today. Its history of colonization and current exploitation of Africa have altered the social fabric. As a result of centuries of colonization, this may take several decades or even centuries to accomplish. The first. USA. Well, if the United States of America is on this list, it shouldn't come as a surprise to you. The United States, which is frequently praised as the country of freedom and opportunity, may surprise you by revealing a grim truth that many people would prefer to overlook. America's battles with racism are enduring, entrenched, and clear. It's an uncomfortable truth that has often come to light, illuminating the picture of a country struggling with its own beliefs. African Americans tragically died in 2020 at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer, shocking the entire world. This heartbreaking occurrence sparked a bigger discussion about the challenges experienced by Black immigrants in the country and showed the pervasive racism present in American institutions. In addition to immigration, Black people who have had historical ties to the U.S. also experience prejudice. While almost 5 million Black immigrants came to the U.S. in search of the American ideal, the bulk of Black Americans are descended from individuals who were brought here against their will as slaves. The brutal reality of systemic racism, however, frequently clashes with the promise of a better life. Approximately 63% of Americans according to Pew Research, believe that racism is now more prevalent in America than it formerly was. According to the report, 76% of Black and Asian people and 58% of Hispanics claim to have been the victim of discrimination or unjust treatment because of their race or ethnicity. About 52% of Black Americans say that racism in American laws is the major concern for Black people, while 43% focus on individual racism. Black people only obtain 73.9% of the economic advantages that white people have, according to the National Urban League's annual report on the state of Black America. Black people have made some gains in the economy and in terms of health. But since the introduction of this measure in 2005, they have lagged behind white people in terms of civic engagement, social justice, and education. The U.S. may be a nation of opportunity, but only for white people. Did you realize that these nations still tolerate racism? Do you believe that racism has ingrained itself into the fundamental fabric of these countries' histories? Tell us which of these nations you didn't expect to see on the list. Would you like to see more movies like this one? If so, click the bell icon next to our channel and subscribe. We've made the decision to present videos on a topic that is rarely discussed: the history, culture of the Black people, as well as proof of their greatness. Stay tuned until the next video, and thanks for viewing.